Airport employees, what is the scariest/strangest thing that happened at your airport? Story 1. I was at the airport one day, waiting for my girlfriend to pick me up after my flight. She was about 20 minutes away, so I sat down on a window ledge and started browsing Reddit, obviously. As usual, there were various airport employees, security personnel, and passengers milling about. After about 5 minutes, I noticed a couple of cops with a dog giving me the side eye. They walked by, but suddenly, the dog got really close to me, and then sat down. The cops gave me a very intense look and reached under the ledge where I was sitting. Out of nowhere, they pulled out a bag containing a few grams of weed. It was not mine, and I started internally freaking out, like any normal person would. One of the cops asked, "What's this all about?" Then the other cop burst out laughing and explained that they were doing K9 training, and I had just happened to sit right over the exact spot where they had hidden the bag for the dog to find. The cops were laughing so hard they had to take a couple-minute break from training, and once my blood pressure returned to something resembling normal, I thought it was pretty funny too. Edit, I should mention, that there was at least 300 feet of window ledge to choose from, and I somehow managed to pick the exact spot they'd hidden the training bag. Before we continue, do us a quick favor, smash that like button, and subscribe to support our channel. Story 2. This one's from my dad. We were getting off a plane at Lagos Airport in 1992. I was about 10 years old, and as kids do, I wandered around the baggage hall. In a secluded corner, I found a service lift with a massive hole cut into the door. It was cordoned off, so you couldn't use it. Curious, I asked my dad about it. He told me the story. A cleaner had been using the service lift one night after his shift to return to the departures area where he could stash his trolley and cleaning supplies. The lift broke down between floors. He hit the emergency help button. Nothing happened. This was Nigeria in the early 90s, remember? And of course, this was long before mobile phones were a thing. He pounded on the walls, shouted for help, but the lift was in a quiet part of the airport that rarely saw traffic. He wasn't scheduled to work the next day. So when his colleagues arrived, they saw the open cupboard, the missing trolley, and assumed someone had stolen it. They carried on. When they tried using the service lift, it didn't work, but they didn't hear him inside. He was trapped closer to the lower floor than the upper one. At this point, he'd been stuck for nearly 18 hours. Desperate, he drank water from the mop bucket. Still no help. He kept pounding, hoping anyone would hear. After 24 hours, his family came to the airport to find out where he was. Their village had no telephone, or at least not one that worked. His co-workers hadn't seen him. Maybe they thought he'd gone into the city to spend his paycheck, which he'd received that morning. Eventually, nearly 48 hours had passed. The man was sick from drinking dirty water. He'd had to use another bucket as a toilet. The stench was unbearable. Finally, a technician arrived to fix the broken lift. Relief? Not yet. The technician managed to get the lift down to the ground floor, but the doors wouldn't open. They tried prying them, jimmying the mechanism. Nothing worked. They even removed the motors and tried opening it by hand. No luck. Eventually, they realized they'd have to cut him out. Out came the angle grinder. Sparks flying everywhere. They cut a 2-foot by 2-foot hole in the outer skin of the door, but they couldn't get the grinder any deeper to reach the inner layer. So out came the gas torch, an oxyacetylene cutter or gas axe. Now imagine this. You've been trapped in pitch darkness for 2 full days. You're dehydrated, disoriented, nauseated, and suddenly someone starts blasting white-hot metal inches from your face. The poor man was terrified. But eventually they managed to cut a hole through both doors. He crawled out, collapsed, and was taken away in an ambulance. He survived, but never returned to work at the airport. That broken lift was still there when we left Nigeria in 1995. When I returned on business in 2001, it had finally been repaired. Even now, I think about that man every time I step into an elevator. Story 3. I was working as cabin crew on a turnaround flight from Dubai, UAE to Muscat, Oman, and back. While we were on the ground in Muscat, the ground staff informed us to take extra care of a passenger who was about to board. She was an English lady in her 50s, well presented, as you'd expect, but still rather unassuming. However, she looked completely shaken when she stepped on board. Here's what had happened. She had checked in her luggage and proceeded to security. She placed her trolley bag on the conveyor belt and walked ahead through the metal detector, waiting on the other side for her bag. The next thing she knew, she was being detained, handcuffed, and taken into a room for questioning. Her bag was brought in, and the questioning began. Airport police officer, did you pack this bag yourself? Lady, yes. Police officer, so you know what's in the bag? Lady, yes, and she proceeded to describe the contents. The questioning continued, and it was quite aggressive. Then the officer opened the bag, and right on top of everything was a parcel filled with marijuana. She was absolutely aghast. She protested her innocence and said she had no idea how it got there. The poor woman was completely distraught. The seriousness of the situation hit her. Drug trafficking is a serious crime anywhere, but in the Middle East it can carry the death penalty. Thankfully, the officers reviewed the CCTV footage of the security area. It showed that as she placed her bag on the belt and turned away, a man standing directly behind her quickly unzipped her bag and slipped the parcel in. She had no idea who he was, just a complete stranger who took advantage of a split second. She was released and allowed to continue her journey, but her trolley bag was confiscated as evidence. At that point, she wasn't too concerned about the bag. I got her a very large brandy. Moral of the story: never ever let your bags out of your sight, even for a second. Story 4. Okay, so I didn't work for the airport. I worked for a tourism company that rented office space in the airport. The job was brutal. First flight in to last flight out, meaning 18-hour shifts a few days a week. It absolutely sucked. The upside? You gotta know, basically everyone in the airport, the help desk ladies, the cabbies out front, even the late-night hookers who trolled for lonely businessmen. Two of the more memorable characters I met were police officers. We'll call them Brian and Jeff. See, the airport had tons of security, but only really two actual police officers. Jeff was the younger one, probably just 4 or 5 years older than me. He patrolled the inside of the terminal and was always super chipper, one of those guys genuinely happy to be a cop. Brian, on the other hand, was just about to retire. The word around the airport was that he had a serious drinking problem, and they'd assigned him to the airport to keep him out of trouble. He spent most of his time sitting in his patrol car, monitoring illegal parking and speeders. They worked the same long shifts I did, and I'd often see them eating lunch together in the car. Life was uneventful for months. A few things broke the monotony. One time a general had a layover, and I snuck into baggage claim with Jeff to see him sitting there, surrounded by guards. Another time, I saw a Navy woman so excited to greet her boyfriend that she ran full speed into the automatic doors. Turns out they opened slightly slower than you'd expect. Mostly it was boring minimum wage stuff. Then, one morning around 7:30, the airport went into full lockdown, like red alert, all hands on deck type of lockdown. Apparently, a piece of luggage from the first flight of the morning had never been claimed. When it was finally investigated, it tested positive for explosive materials. With only Jeff and Brian on site, they had to assist the TSA with the situation. Tensions were high. Nothing was said to the public, but over our staff radio we were instructed to evacuate to the parking lot. About 30 minutes later, Brian suddenly comes sprinting out of the terminal at full speed. Right behind him is Jeff, shouting, "Look, look what we found." He's holding up, and I kid you not, the biggest, blackest fist-shaped fake dong I have ever seen. It had to be 2 feet long. Brian's yelling back, "Keep that freaking thing away from me. Keep it away." He dives into his patrol car and starts rolling up the windows as fast as he can. Jeff tries to feed the fake dong through the small crack in the window. Brian eventually throws the car into gear and speeds off with a gigantic black fake dong stuck in his driver's side window, flopping wildly in the wind. One of my most precious memories. Story 5. Last year, I was working as a contractor in the planning department of a large commercial airport. This airport has a park situated between the runways where people go to sit and watch planes take off and land. One evening, I decided to take my 2 young sons there since they enjoy watching the planes. As it started to get dark, I noticed a woman stand up, raise her arms, and begin making a howling sound. At first I wasn't sure what she was doing or where the sound was coming from. Then she did it again, and I realized it was definitely her, and that she might be a little unwell. This went on for a few minutes, and I eventually decided to pack up and leave. Meanwhile, she remained standing there, arms lifted to the sky, howling at the planes as they took off. A week or so later, I was riding around the airport with an operations guy, and I told him about my visit to the park and what I kept seeing. He asked, was there a Lufthansa Airbus departing while she was doing that? I said, yeah, there was. He nodded and told me she's actually pretty well known around the airport. According to him, she believes she died in a previous life on a Lufthansa flight and was reincarnated into her current body. She feels spiritually connected to that specific flight and comes out to the park to pray over it every time it departs. Edit. Just remembered. I actually took a video of this. You can see her stand up at 0:14, start singing at 0:30, and the Lufthansa flight departs shortly after. Edit #2. I'm surprised by how many Redditors have seen this woman too. It really is a small world. TLDR. Our local airport has a woman who believes she died on a Lufthansa flight in a past life. She comes to the runway park and prays over that flight every time it takes off. Story 6. I used to work security periodically to supplement my income. In 2002, I was assigned for the first time to the Spirit Airlines repair facility at Meacham International Airport in Fort Worth, Texas. One day, I was sitting in the guard shack with a coworker reading a book, when suddenly several Fort Worth Police Department vehicles swarmed the parking lot. SWAT officers, accompanied by a surprising number of federal agents, locked the entire facility down at gunpoint. My coworker and I were literally dragged out of the guard shack and held at gunpoint while law enforcement secured the site. As it turned out, Spirit Airlines hadn't been conducting proper background checks on their aircraft mechanics. A number of them were in the country illegally, using falsified documents. Several were even suspected of having ties to extremist groups in the Philippines. The rumor around the office was that a C-level executive at Spirit had privately flown them in to save on payroll costs, though that was never officially confirmed. As if that wasn't bad enough, my coworker and I were later reprimanded for not immediately contacting our supervisory staff when the raid began. While we were being held at gunpoint. Story 7. I just got into work, and I was having breakfast with my coworkers. Outside the hangar, we heard some shouting going on, not normal for a Sunday. We all decide to walk to the ramp and check it out. On the other side of the chain-link fence, the UPS parking lot, 3 very overweight airport cops are chasing a slightly overweight guy around all the cars on foot. Straight up Benny Hill-style chase going on. A fire truck from the airport was shadowing this from the ramp. This chase had been going on for a long time at this point. Everyone was barely running. The parking lot has a fence on 3 sides, one side open. One of the 3 cops stopped his chase and went back to block the exit. The suspect realized he was trapped and just straight up charged the exit. The cop yelled, "Stop now or I am going to taser you." The suspect in a full sprint screamed, "Tase me." The guy got about 5 feet away from the cop and he shot him with the taser, square in the chest. It didn't stop this guy at all. He just kept on running. He literally passed the cop about 3 feet to his left and ran out of our sight. The cop looked at his taser and started swearing at it. The other 2 joined up with him and, completely winded, just stopped and looked at each other. Then the 3 of them walked out of our sight as well. The fire truck took off like hell to the other side of the ramp. Coworkers and myself decide to go through the hangar to the front office so we can get a better look at where the guy went. Out front, there's 3 cop cars parked on the road. 1 cop in 1 car, and the other 2 empty. The 3 cops from before are walking down from the parking lot. No suspect was with them. Then across the street, a few people ran out of the UPS office and were screaming and waving at the cops. The suspect was in their close parking lot, trying to get into one of the cars. The fire truck is back in the UPS FedEx ramp. The 4 cops now chase in after him, 1 in car and 3 still on foot. The guy tries to run again, but he was trapped. Good. He turned and runs up the airport fence and jumps into the secured area. This was a 10-foot fence with barbed wire. He made it look easy. The cops didn't even try to jump the fence. The suspect running along the UPS building finally met his match, a fire truck. Not any fire truck, but a first response airport fire with a water cannon. The truck chased him down and blasted him with the water cannon. It picked him out and threw him into the building. This guy ragdolled along the building from the water. It was awesome. I forgot to mention it was February and about 10 Fed outside. It was really cold. The guy got back up and they blasted him again. He got up again but didn't run. He just turned and started limping away. He turned a corner and we lost sight again. The truck very slowly went around the corner as well. From what I learned later, the guy was picked up shortly after this. He willingly walked to the security guys at UPS and gave up. The suspect and an accomplice were breaking into cars at the fuel farm at the airport. The robbed two earlier in the week. That Sunday they were caught in the act. The accomplice getaway driver left the other guy behind and rolled his car over on the other side of town in a high-speed chase. The fuel farm was about a half-mile away. The cops chased this guy on foot a half-mile before we even started watching. TLDR, 4 cops chase a thief around a parking lot until he jumped a fence into the airport. A fire truck blasted him with a water cannon in freezing weather. He gave up cold and wet. Story 8. I used to work on the ramp for UPS, and during my time there, we had a few memorable and sometimes disturbing incidents. One time, one of our smaller aircraft was on approach when the pilot experienced a hydraulic issue. He shut off the automatic systems to troubleshoot manually. With no warning system to alert him otherwise, he ended up landing the plane without deploying the landing gear. I've told this one before, but we used to ship crates of bees through our system. In one incident, a box broke loose mid-flight inside a Beech 99. The pilot had to declare an emergency, take the plane to its maximum altitude to subdue the bees, and then make an emergency landing as quickly as possible. We also had an employee who severely mangled his hand while trying to attach a tow bar to the front wheel of a plane. Blood was everywhere, and his hand was never the same afterward. But honestly, the scariest part of working on the airport ramp wasn't what happened. It was who worked there at 2 a.m. During my 3.5 years on the job, I worked with 3 people who were either murderers or attempted murderers. One guy got into an argument at a local college and shot someone in a classroom. Another beat his girlfriend's 3-year-old daughter to death. He's currently on Arizona's death row. And the most heartbreaking for me, a friend of mine, someone I was genuinely close to and thought was a good guy, was involved in a robbery that went sideways. His partner stabbed the woman they were trying to rob. The two fled, and while on the run, his partner ended up murdering him before taking his own life. It was a dark time. Story 9. TLDR, I almost got shot while servicing a commercial aircraft that happened to be carrying Salman Rushdie, guarded by what looked like a private mercenary squad. I used to work at Dulles International Airport outside Washington, D.C. in the 1990s. The company I worked for serviced most international flights, Lufthansa, Air Nippon, Air France, etc. One frigid winter evening, I was working in the Air France bag room where your checked luggage goes, and my coworker and I were headed out to the plane with a couple of last-minute checked bags. Winter at Dulles is brutal. Wind chills across that vast open tarmac are intense, so you bundle up. The warmest thing I owned at the time was a U.S. Army winter BDU jacket, which I was wearing. This becomes important later. As we drive our tug up to the back of the plane around 4:30 p.m., it's already twilight in January or February, I notice an MWA airport police truck and a few soldier-looking guys forming a loose perimeter around the aircraft. In several years working there, I had never seen anything quite like it. But airports are weird places, and you get used to the unusual. I don't say anything to my coworker. Between the jet engines and wind, it's too loud to talk anyway. Besides, we're on a tight schedule. Pushback is probably 15 minutes away. We pull up. I hop off the tug, hustle the bags up the conveyor belt, while my coworker goes to park the tug. I close up the hatch, and then drive the conveyor belt tug out of the way to park it. This is where it gets wild. Now it's my job to go pull the nose wheel chocks and help with pushback. I'm in a hurry, so I hop off the parked tug and start jogging toward the front of the plane. In a camouflage jacket. In the dark. About 30 yards from the nose, I'm suddenly stopped in my tracks. A man is standing in front of me, and I'm staring down the barrel of a carbine. SKS? AK-47? AR-15? Something serious. He's wearing a tan keffiyeh, MTP webbing, a .45 in a chest rig, and no joke, 2 fragmentation grenades. Then, out of nowhere, my manager comes sprinting out of the darkness in his khakis and clipboard, yelling, "He's okay, he's okay," and showing the guy my airport badge, which is strapped in a plastic sleeve on my arm. The guy lowers his weapon, and my manager steers my stunned self toward the plane's nose. He gives me a look that clearly says, "Don't ask. Just do your job. I'll explain later." As I move forward, I notice more armed men, all in eclectic gear. One's got a Desert Eagle in a thigh rig and an MP5 slung over his shoulder. Another looks like a cross between Yaphet Kotto in Alien and Chocolate Mousse from Top Secret. Off to the side, 2 MWAA cops casually stand by their Explorer like this is all completely normal. Then a Dulles people mover rolls up. That's unusual. The plane is ready to push, so everyone should already be on board. As the vehicle approaches, I notice men standing in the open doors holding trench coats wide to block the view inside. All the windows are opaque. The vehicle docks, presumably drops off a few mystery passengers, then departs. I'm given the nod to pull the nose chocks, still surrounded by very serious, heavily armed men. I move very slowly, no sudden movements. Once the plane taxis away, we head back to the office. I march over to my manager and demand to know why I almost got shot doing my damn job. He's on the phone, listening intently, pale and tense. He raises a hand, tells me to wait, and points to a chair. About 3 minutes later, he relaxes and hangs up. Then he says, "The plane has taken off, so now I can tell you Salman Rushdie was on that flight." For context, Salman Rushdie is the author of the 1988 novel The Satanic Verses, which was considered blasphemous by many Muslims. The Ayatollah Khomeini of Iran issued a fatwa calling for his death, and for years Rushdie lived under the threat of assassination. He traveled with armed protection, often involving British security services. That particular day, it seems his security detail included a mercenary-looking private squad, and MWAA was in on the plan. Story 10. My dad used to run a business in Missouri, and once hired a mechanic who turned out to be absolutely terrible. He left his tools lying around, the trucks he worked on would constantly break down, and everything he touched ended up covered in greasy fingerprints. Needless to say, the guy was fired and quickly forgotten. Fast forward a few years, my parents are on their honeymoon in Cancun. As they're boarding the plane to come home, the pilot gets on the PA and announces that the flight will be delayed due to maintenance. My dad glances out the window toward the wing and freezes. He sees tools scattered on the ground, oily fingerprints all over the wing, and then, unbelievably, that same awful mechanic walks out from under the wing and starts working on a panel. My dad freaks out and immediately wants off the plane. Edit for all the questions. No, he didn't get off. They'd already paid for the flight, and there was no way my mom was about to leave. They made it home safely, or I wouldn't be here to tell you the story. Story 11. Worked at a tiny little airport with puddle hopper planes. Plane landed on an insanely windy day in the winter, so there was still some ice on the ground. I went out to flag the plane in and watched incredulously as the wind blew the entire plane sideways toward the ditch next to the taxiway. The pilot had to do some serious engine revving to keep the plane from going into the ditch. Kinda funny, and a little scary. Luckily, no passengers were on board. Edit. Quick clarification that they landed fine because the wind was parallel with the runway. However, the taxiway they were attempting to go down was perpendicular to the wind, 60 to 70 miles per hour winds, plus some residual ice on the taxiway is no bueno. Tail of the plane was taking the brunt of the wind and trying to drag the rest of the plane in the ditch. Kind of looked like someone had an invisible rope attached to the tail and was trying to drag it into the ditch with a tractor or something. It was crazy. Story 12. My mom worked for British Airways for years handling special freight cases for import and export. A lot of this freight wasn't your typical luggage. It was offloaded and stored in a holding warehouse for customers to collect. One day, a shipment arrived from Africa, a large wooden crate that didn't weigh very much. Her client showed up, opened the crate to inspect the contents, and immediately became irate with the warehouse staff. He stormed into her office, holding a frozen, venomous snake. She said it looked like a jagged lightning bolt, all zigs and zags. He was screaming and wildly gesturing with the dead snake, demanding compensation in the hundreds of thousands of dollars. As it turned out, he hadn't declared the contents as live animals, probably to circumvent customs regulations. The crate contained dozens, possibly hundreds, of venomous snakes. Since the cargo hold of most planes isn't heated, the snakes had all frozen to death in transit. He couldn't sue and ended up having to answer some difficult questions from the Treasury Department. The worst part? He had intended to use the snakes to manufacture anti-venom. If he had properly declared them and paid for the appropriate shipping conditions, he could have made a healthy profit and possibly saved some lives. Edit. Thanks for the comments, everyone. We've learned that anti-venom is also known as anti-venin, that many modern planes do have heated cargo areas, and that Samuel L. Jackson was sorely missed in a warehouse somewhere 30 years ago. Take this as a reminder: if you're flying with pets or venomous snakes, always confirm the shipping requirements with your carrier. And as one commenter wisely noted, please don't ship your spouse in a box while on vacation. Story 13. I used to work for TSA, and once intercepted what turned out to be a human trafficking situation. There was a man, a woman, and a little boy. The woman wasn't allowed to speak, and the boy looked terrified. He wouldn't even look at me. That really unsettled me. I told my supervisor, who immediately called airport police. As soon as the man saw me go over to speak with her, he became visibly agitated. He quickly sent the woman and the boy down the terminal ahead of him and started grabbing all their belongings to follow them. The police arrived and asked me for a description. Since the airport wasn't that big, they were able to find the group quickly and brought them back to the checkpoint. As they got closer, the man tried to redirect the woman toward the exit, clearly trying to avoid her returning to the checkpoint. Eventually, the officers managed to separate the man from the woman and child. She told them everything. A few minutes later, they walked the man out in handcuffs. I didn't get to see what happened to her or the boy after that. My shift was ending. But as I grabbed my stuff from the back, we made eye contact. She gave me a small nod. I took that as her way of saying thank you. It was a scary situation, but I'd do it again in a heartbeat. There's no telling what could have happened to that woman and child if I hadn't trusted my instincts. Edit. First, thank you for the gold, kind stranger. I really didn't expect this to blow up. This happened at RIC about 6 years ago. I often think about that woman and hope she's doing well. Maybe, just maybe, she'll see this one day and know I never forgot her. Story 14. A grown woman once fell asleep while waiting for her flight to board. They called her name several times. This was a small airport, so it was quiet, and she was definitely in the area. She just slept right through it. She eventually woke up and realized she had missed her flight. By then, the gate agent had already pulled back the ramp and the plane was backing up to begin taxiing. She started screaming at the top of her lungs, cursing, crying, full meltdown. Then she got on the phone with her mommy and began shrieking that her mom had to do something because the asshole ticketing agent wouldn't let her on the flight. Again, this was a full-grown adult. She eventually ran into the airport bathroom in full hysterics and had to be physically dragged out by half a dozen TSA employees. Not as weird, but still funny. A guy came up to me in the boarding area and said someone had left their luggage unattended. You know how there are constant announcements about reporting unattended bags or suspicious items? So I told him, okay, I'd call TSA. He was clearly panicked, rambling about how it was probably a bomb. I calmed him down, and he went back to his seat. About 10 minutes later, I went over with the TSA agent and asked him where the bag was. He pointed to a bag right next to him and started rambling again about how it could be a bomb. So I just asked, if you really think there's a bomb in that bag, why are you sitting right next to it? You could literally see the light bulb turn on in his head. Story 15. I wasn't an airport employee, but I was shadowing staff as part of a pilot training program. One of our rotations was to spend a few days with the airport fire department. Fortunately, there wasn't much action, but the fire station was located in the middle of the airfield, so the view was incredible. At the time, the Virginia Air National Guard operated F-16s from the airport. They typically launched in groups of 3 and returned in tight formation, landing 1, 2, 3 in quick succession. One day, I was in the fire station when 3 F-16s were on short final. The tower instructed a bizjet to hold short of the arrival runway. Either the bizjet didn't hear the instruction or misunderstood it because it rolled out onto the runway anyway. The tower immediately told the F-16s to go around. The lead jet banked hard left, followed closely by number 2. But number 3? He kept coming. Gear down, landing light on. The tower urgently called again for the number 3 jet to go around. Since the Air National Guard uses encrypted radios, we could only hear the tower, not the F-16 pilots. Still, the 3rd jet continued his approach. The biz jet was now stuck with nowhere to go, and the firefighters around me were starting to get visibly tense. Then, at the last second, the number 3 F-16 flew directly over the biz jet, gear still down, then simultaneously retracted the gear, hit the afterburner, screamed down half the length of the runway, and pulled up into a sharp left to rejoin his flight. He probably cleared the biz jet by about 100 feet, but from our vantage point in the fire station, it felt a lot closer. I'm sure it felt even closer to the biz jet pilot. The firefighters thought it was absolutely hilarious. Story 16. Most airport work is pretty mundane, but every now and then you get a passenger who leaves an impression. One time, a group came through on a business trip, and their boss had never flown before. One of his employees came in ahead of him and told us they had convinced their boss that TSA required dental records and asked if we'd play along. Sure enough, the boss walks in, hands me his ID and an X-ray from his dentist, thinking it was part of the check-in process. I did my best not to laugh and showed it to my coworker, who looked at it and deadpanned. Well, TSA might have an issue with that. The poor guy went white as a sheet until his employees burst out laughing. His face turned bright red, but eventually he started laughing too. Let it never be said that airports are humorless places. Story 17. Not me, but my sister works at the airport and has shared some memorable stories. Funny story. There was an adult convention in town. During a routine bag check, TSA found a fake dong with a suction cup base, designed to stick to tables or other surfaces. Not realizing what it was, the agent stuck it to the inspection table. When they tried to pick it up, it wouldn't budge. They had to slide it to the edge of the table to break the suction. Everyone nearby got a good laugh. Scary kind of story. A guy came through security and his bag flagged for secondary inspection. Something inside showed up as weird metal encased in plastic. When the agent opened the pencil case it was in, a live scorpion popped its tail up. Apparently, the guy had won it at a scorpion fight or something. The TSA agent just said, "Nope, I'm done for the day," and walked away. Funny and scary. My favorite story. In the checked baggage screening area, one employee, let's call him Employee A, asked his supervisor for the next day off to start his vacation early. The supervisor denied the request since A had already used a lot of time off. A short while later, A was checking a bag when something inside poked him. He told his supervisor he'd been stabbed by something sharp in the bag. The supervisor assumed he was faking to get the day off and inspected it himself. Turns out the sharp object was a scorpion. The supervisor immediately told A to sit down and keep his hand low, then called first aid. The entire team was so freaked out they double-bagged the scorpion and waited for the Department of Agriculture to arrive. Once they finished dealing with another airport, ag workers put the scorpion on ice to kill it and asked the hospital if it was needed for anti-venom. Later, A called his supervisor and said, "I said not coming in tomorrow or for the next month." They said had to give him a large dose of anti-venom and he needed time to recover. Before hanging up, he said, "From now on call me the Scorpion King." I've seen a photo of the scorpion. It looked big, though there was nothing in the image for scale. All of this, except the sex convention story, likely happened in the international terminal, but I'm not 100% sure. Edit. A lot of people have mentioned that if the scorpion was big, it probably wasn't that dangerous. I wasn't there, so I can't speak to its actual size. It looked big in the photo, but with nothing for scale, it's hard to say. Either way, they gave him anti-venom and put him off work to recover. We don't live in an area where wild scorpions are common, so the supervisor likely had no idea how dangerous it was and took every precaution to be safe. The guy survived and got a legendary nickname out of it. Story 18. Now, I don't work at an airport, but I do clear commercial imports into Canada and deal with border officers quite often. I had just logged into my computer to start working when my at-the-time supervisor came over to my desk, slammed some paperwork onto my desk, and told me, "You really messed up this time." Apparently, my company wanted to be more environmentally friendly and decided to start printing invoices on both sides of a piece of paper. So basically, with this particular shipment, I had declared 3 out of the 6 invoices to CBSA. For anyone who is not familiar with customs, that is a big no-no. So we get notification that the shipment has been flagged for investigation, and I was told that if anything bad happens with this shipment, it's on me, which, when translated, is essentially "you fucked up, say goodbye to your job." My supervisor gave me an out. Call the superintendent at the port, hint 1497, YYZ, to hint and kiss some serious booty. She gives me the number and I get connected with the superintendent's receptionist. I briefly inform her of my intentions to speak with the superintendent, to which I am placed on a brief hold while she goes to find him. This brief hold turned into a 3-hour non-exaggerated time. It was 12 o'clock to 17 o'clock before this all got resolved. During these 3 hours, I sat patiently waiting for someone to talk back. All the while, I had my supervisor coming to check up on me to see where I was at with my situation. So, 3 hours pass, and I get a call from CBSA. The caller ID showed up as GovCan on my phone, and I was extremely nervous to pick up, but I was greeted with, "Good afternoon, this is the superintendent of the airport." To which my jaw dropped, and as I went to introduce myself to the superintendent, a thought crossed my mind. "You've been on hold for 3 hours waiting for this man. Maybe this will be my trump card." I immediately take on a soft, "Oh my dear Lord, I am terribly sorry" tone, and explain to him that I was placed on hold for 3 hours, not that it bothered me any, and that I didn't want to run the risk of having to call back and being a further nuisance to this nice man. To which I hear the man yell, "You've been what? On hold for 3 hours. Give me a second." Radio chatter. Something about "I told you to tell him that I was in a meeting for the rest of the afternoon and that I would call him back." The man comes back to the phone with a much more cooperative tone after that. He then asked me what I was calling for, to which I gave a sob story about how my company was just trying to help save the environment. I'm a dumbass, and that I wanted to avoid an AMPS administrative monetary penalty system penalty. He chuckled and said, "Is that all? Consider it done," and he let me correct my error. In the end, I avoided a fine that ranges from $200 upwards to $8,000, kept my job, and was able to create a reputation of being a smooth talker in my office. TLDR, airport superintendent's receptionist kept me on hold for 3 hours, which I used to my advantage, and got myself out of a fine. Story 19. Not me, but a guy I once met. He works at the counter for a big local airline. There was a lady about mid to late 50s about to board with 4 big suitcases. This was a time when you normally could bring up to 2 suitcases or 23 kilograms. He notices this and tells the lady she would have to pay for the extra 2 suitcases. The lady nonchalantly says, "Oh, my husband is carrying those." He asks about her husband, and again, completely relaxed and in a natural voice, she points at the plane and answers, "That's him in the coffin." After that, he apologizes and let the lady board. Story 20. My parents worked in airports and told me this story that happened sometime in the late 70s. They notice a patch of purple on the marble floor near the check-in queue. Thinking someone has spilt their red wine on the floor, a cleaner comes over and clears it up. About half an hour later, there's another pool of purple. A different cleaner comes along, clears it up. Eventually, the original cleaner comes back, Notices the same pool he cleared up already is back. He doesn't know what's going on. He looks up. There's an air vent, dripping something. Maybe it's air conditioning coolant or something? He reports it to his supervisor. Nothing happens for a day or two. They just keep mopping up this coolant. Eventually, they send an aircon tech into the roof. He comes back down the ladder, white as a sheet. It's a body. Turns out someone had tried to break past security by climbing through the air ducts. This is pre-Die Hard, remember, so quite clever. Wasn't so clever was taking a wrong turn in the dark and falling 30 feet into a fan mechanism drop. Smoosh. Story 21. Worked at an airline over the summer as an intern. I was assisting in the check-in area and helping passengers who used the kiosks to check in. Now this was the time many airlines introduced basic economy and many people didn't know about the new baggage rules which won't let you bring on a carry-on bag, just one personal item. This family of 5 comes along returning home, and they seem to know about the rule. Maybe they encountered it on the way here, but they all had backpacks, a couple of them more than one actually. So I go and kindly remind them about the basic economy baggage rules, and they snapped back at me and said they knew. So they had about 9 bags, all relatively small bags. So in order to save money on their checked bags, the father takes out a big roll of tape and just sits down in the check-in area taping their bags together, so it'll only be one. Everyone looked at them, but it worked. Story 22. 4 years ago, I got an airport job as a ramp agent at a charter airport in my town. I worked every summer there, but this story still comes back to me. Most of our passengers are from Russia, and you know what Russia is famous for, minus Russians. So, I get a call that a passenger, ready to board a flight, is drunk out of his mind. Usually the cabin crew and the pilots decide whether or not to let him travel. The passenger bus arrives at the aircraft, and from the seat next to the driver comes out a tall, fat drunk. The bus driver helps him stay on his feet. He miraculously climbs the steps. Then the cabin crew rejects him. He was already in his seat and doesn't want to disembark. Border police gets involved. 2 well-built guys try to drag him out of his seat, but he manages to pull them back in and spews profanities. As I see there isn't an improvement, I get down to the cargo compartments to search for his checked-in bag. A bag can't travel normally without a passenger, and this aircraft was with containers, so we need to search through 7-8 containers with 30 bags each. As we are looking through them, the cleaning staff comes on. I ask my colleagues why would they come now, and he tells me that the man shat himself. He was in the front rows. When I got back on board, all the passengers were covering their noses and mouths. Several years later, I found out it was because the policeman kicked him in the stomach to make him budge. Were this an occurrence last year, I'm sure he would get a nice check after suing the company. Even though it was a normal procedure. Story 23. Not scary, but I worked at a little bookstore in Orlando International MCO about a decade ago. We sold only books and book-related items, placekeepers, reading glasses, book lights, etc. Because there was an actual newsstand a little way across the terminal that we didn't bother competing with. One day, a very tall, angular, and frankly intimidating bald man came rushing up to the counter and straight up yelled into my bewildered face, "Where the hell are your newspapers?" I stuttered out my canned apology and pointed across the way to the other shop. He growled and hauled ass in that direction without a word. Another customer who'd heard the shout approached me exclaiming, "Don't you know who that was?" I did not. It was a fellow called James Carville, a well-known political commentator and media personality. I once had a coffee with a fully costumed and very convincing Abraham Lincoln at the Starbucks next to our shop. I also had a pleasant, if somewhat morbid in light of her profession, run-in with Dr. G. Jan Garavaglia. The worst near miss though. My best friend worked in the same store and was working a shift while I had my day off. I came back the next day to an amazing gift from her set. James Earl Jones had graced our little shop and signed a few of the Star Wars pop-up books we had in stock. My best friend hadn't recognized him at all and wasn't even familiar with his career until our manager approached him. She was shocked that he'd voiced Vader and gushed to me about getting to meet Simba's dad. Story 24. Obligatory, not an airport employee. This happened in Manila. which had the notorious distinction of having the worst airport in the world for several years in a row. While we were waiting for our baggage, the conveyor belt stalled. Instead of calling a technician to fix the belt, the idiots running the belt tried to jump-start it, and instead sent a section of the rubber parts of the conveyor flying. Luckily, no one was hurt. It did cause a big scene though and took about an hour for the conveyor to start working again. Now you're asking, couldn't they just reassign you to another baggage claim? Nope. Remember, this is the Manila airport we're talking about. We don't go the extra mile for our travelers. No, sir. But that wasn't the best part of the whole experience. After waiting for what seemed like an eternity, people were already getting their bags and whatnot. A particular box comes out of the magic butthole of the conveyor and an excited passenger reaches for it. Happy as he is that the box, clearly labeled fragile, survived intact, he goes and grabs it from the conveyor. Said contents of the box, which look like fine china, promptly come crashing onto the conveyor and surrounding floor, which causes another delay in the baggage while the airport employees clean up the mess. The man, clearly exasperated, just can't help but laugh at how shitty his day was going. Good for him. Edit. I remember another incident. While checking into our flight, a certain airport employee was offering people to skip the lines in exchange for some money. Some Korean lady actually took him on that offer. I would have tried to warn her, but she just bolted right with the guy. Story 25. Oh man. Back when I worked at the main office for an airline, we attended a feel-good meeting for employees, and I ended up sitting at a table of female flight attendants. As we described our jobs to one another, one of the stories that came out of that table was of a passenger who was flying home from basic training job school and had way too much to drink just before boarding. When it came time to deplane, he ended up tripping on his carry-on and falling face down partly between the seats and into the aisle. Instead of getting up, he stayed there, presenting the young flight attendants with a problem in getting the rest of the passengers off. While one of the attendants was trying to get the guy to get up, he was getting belligerent. The other called on the crew phone to the cockpit for help. About that time, a short, elderly gentleman near the back of the plane politely asked the flight attendant on the phone what had happened and received an explanation. The guy said, "I see," and walked down the aisle to where the other flight attendant was standing on the other side of the drunken soldier. The other flight attendant saw the old man stop to look down at the drunk, and started to ask him to step back when he suddenly put his fists on his hips, and his voice rang throughout the plane with, "On your feet, soldier." Per the attendants, the drunk practically flew off the floor and almost brained himself on the overhead luggage rack, snapping to attention. Then the old guy leaned up into the drunk's ear and spoke quietly to him. The flight attendant telling the story said, "I don't know what the old man said to him, but the young guy looked scared. When done, the old man told the drunk to pick up his gear and literally marched him off the plane into the hands of the police waiting on the loading ramp. They found out later the short, elderly gentleman was a retired Marine Corps senior drill instructor. God bless the Marines? Story 26. I have several that come to mind. I worked the ramp for a major airline at Chicago O'Hare. I was working down in the basement in the baggage sorter one day, when an employee brings over an odd-sized piece of luggage wrapped in plastic. At first glance, it looked like those collapsible hand carts for bags. I asked the guy what it was, and he replies, it was an S&M table. Thinking he was messing with a new guy, I take a closer look and see that it is a half-sized folding table. Then I notice the 3-foot-long metal stick with handles on the top and labeled the jackhammer. The last giveaway was the pair of shiny metal handcuffs also in the package. So more than likely, an actual S&M table, going to Ohio or Iowa. Glad it was wrapped in plastic. Another incident was when we were loading a plane. I was in the plane with my lead sending up bags. He puts one to the side and calls a supervisor because it is vibrating. Supervisor comes out, a cool Hispanic guy relevant to check it out. From my view in the pit, I watch him open it and suddenly he starts smiling and shouting in an accent which made it even funnier. Oh no, oh no. Sure enough, it was a personal massager, and from what I was told, the supervisor had to pull the passenger off the plane onto the jet bridge to disarm the device, who was apparently an 18-year-old blonde woman who turned completely red-faced. Little tip, when you travel, take the batteries out. A weird one I had. Back downstairs working in the sorter, I had one bag drop onto my pier. A regular piece of luggage, but it opens up on me. It does happen, rarely. I go to close it, and what confused me was that it contained only 4 white t-shirts, but was filled to the top with packages of soft-shell tortillas going to Texas. Just a weird thing to take to a state where they probably have a lot of options for that. One that kind of pissed me off was a bag that had come from China and flying with us, but someone thought it was a good idea to strap 2 unsheathed metal swords to the back of it. They weren't even good quality as they were already bent, not even sharp, the kind they sell to tourists and novelty stores, but that someone thought this was smart and that an agent accepted this in China just baffled me. One of the things we do handle with shipping are bodies. Contrary to popular belief, not every plane is transporting a dead body and we don't get them that often. I might see one once every 2 months. Airport-wide, we might get them once a week. Well, this one was different. I was working cargo one day and had to pick up the mail from an inbound flight. I thought it was weird that they were showing 2 items on the manifest for mail in the same location, one being many pieces totaling 1,000 pounds, not unusual, and a separate one being only 2 pounds. Turns out that single piece was a box with cremated remains in it. It was intact, fortunately, but the thought of being mailed back home just didn't seem right. Lastly, the scariest was probably when American Airlines Flight 383 caught on fire. I just got to work, got off the employee bus, walked to my work area, and as soon as I walked outside, I noticed this big plume of black smoke. And my first thought was that isn't in the right spot. The fire department burns their stuff on the other side of the airport. I had never seen an accident of that size with that big of a plane, just made me fear the worst. Fortunately, nobody died. The plane is still at the airport. You can probably see it from Tuhi or I-90. It's just completely white now. Story 27. I used to be a ramp manager for an air freight company in upstate NY. We had a very small place at the airport with a plane that would park directly behind our building. It wasn't a huge plane, but we had enough business to warrant a bird for our market. We had a very vulgar GM at this facility. I always got along with him and never had issues with him, but there were times where he played the role of the screaming manager you often see in movie flicks. He always presented himself well, clean-shaved, sharp suits, shiny shoes, and perfectly placed hair. He also had a way with words. Some of the folks said he could sell ketchup popsicles to folks in white gloves. The facility we had was rather small, and the printer for the plane manifest was right next to our customer service window. When our manager heard the printer go off, he would briskly walk from his office to the printer and check out the status of the plane along with the inbound cargo. It was like clockwork every day. You would hear the sound of our Oki data line printer spitting out the manifest, then without hesitation, the click-clack of our GM. Footsteps as he walked to the front of the office, where he would tear off the manifest, quickly glance, start pacing around the office and scream at it. It was magical. Every day someone at the hub was trying to screw him, and he let us all know of it. He would start with the receptionist, show her the manifest, then strut over to the customs brokerage desk and scream to them. Sometimes he would rage out onto the dock and yell at the truck drivers while pointing at the green and white paper. Other times, if no one was at their desks, he would march out onto the ramp, holding the paper pointing and screaming at it. Anyone who made eye contact was doomed to hear about it. This one morning the routine goes down. He's standing at the printer, oblivious to his surroundings, and he goes off. Horses. Mother effing horses. All of our freight was bumped because of the horses being flown in today. What backwoods redneck needs horses air freighted in? They're trying to screw me again. During his rampage and pacing around, he did not notice the 2 attractive females that were waiting at the customer service desk. I had noticed them, and I gestured at the manager to hush, then pointed at the counter. He quickly spun around and turned red in the face. He began to apologize for his foul mouth instantly, and went from pissed to impressive in a 180-degree fashion. His face was blush red, but with impeccable brilliance. He began to say very nice things while working some charm. He went on about how stressful things can be, and how their faces have lifted his bad thoughts with. It was some remarkable swagger. They said it was no problem, and smiled with charm at him. He then said, "How can I help you today?" while leaning with alpha dominance towards the prettier girl. The girl he was leaning towards says, We're here to pick up the mother effing horses, and we're definitely not trying to screw you," while making complete eye contact with him. His face then went 3 shades purple, and he started to bite his bottom lip. He muttered, "Okay," put his head down, walked back to his office, and shut the door. That day was wonderful. Our manager locked himself in his office until the plane came and the horses went with their owners. Next morning he was back at it again, just like clockwork. Story 28. "Oh man, I'm late to this post, but I've got a good one, so I'm writing it out anyway." For a summer during college, I had a job as a ramp agent, aka baggage handler, at a regional airport. As a temp employee, the pay was shit, but overall, I really enjoyed the job. I usually worked the afternoon slat shift, which was pretty relaxed after the first couple of hours. We would get flights arriving until about midnight. Although O'Hare would regularly send us significantly delayed flights, so sometimes we'd be there until 2 or 3 in the morning. One night, it was rounding on 2 a.m. and pretty much the entire airport had gone home except for me and the other agent, Sam. We were stuck waiting for the last O'Hare plane to show up. It was about 15 minutes out, so we head outside to get ready. As we make our way to the scheduled gate, we walk around a sky bridge and there's a guy on the tarmac with a rifle about a gate and a half away from us. He seemed to see us and didn't really react to our presence, but he was walking in our direction. As an airport employee, even just a lowly temp worker, you're reminded pretty thoroughly to always keep an eye out for people not wearing badges in restricted areas. This is what I'm focusing on as Sam mutters, "Oh shit," and beelines for cover. I just stand there like a dumbass thinking, I didn't expect this to be how I die. Meanwhile, Rifle Guy is pretty much right next to us now, and he finally realizes that he's got us shitting ourselves, so he gets his badge out of his pocket. Apparently on some nights after the airport shuts down there are employees who go out on the tarmac with air rifles to get rid of the pigeons. They really ought to warn everybody else about that. Thank you for watching. If you enjoyed this video, be sure to give it a thumbs up, subscribe, and hit the bell icon so you never miss an update.